My fiancé said, if my ex was here, he'd have bought me a diamond ring. I took it back and walked out. She called in tears and said things she never should have. I saved for 3 months for that ring. The moment she saw it, her first words shattered everything. My ex would have bought a diamond. I stood there, holding the velvet box, watching her cold, analytical gaze. The air suddenly felt thin, and I knew, deep down, something fundamental had just broken. Let me rewind a bit, because this didn't start with a ring. It began much earlier, probably around the time I realized I was in a relationship with 2 people, even though only one of them was ever actually in the room. My name's Daniel. I'm 26, working IT support in Austin, and for 4 years, I genuinely thought Chloe was my person. She was everything I wanted: smart, funny, gorgeous. For the first 2 years, things were perfect. We moved in together, found a great apartment near downtown, split everything, talked about our future like any normal couple. But somewhere around year 3, a ghost moved in with us, and his name was Michael. At first, it was subtle, just little comments I tried to brush off. I didn't want to be that guy, the insecure boyfriend who couldn't handle hearing about an ex. She'd casually mention how Michael used to take her to that Italian place, or how he always remembered her favorite flowers, how he had amazing taste in wine. I'd smile, nod, change the subject. What else could I do? My younger brother, Caleb, noticed it first, about a year into the Michael comments. We were grabbing beers at our usual spot, and I was telling him about our anniversary dinner plans when I accidentally let slip that Chloe had suggested the restaurant because Michael used to take her there. Caleb set his beer down, looking at me like I'd just announced I was getting a face tattoo. "Dude, that's weird," he said. I laughed it off, said she was just being nostalgic. But Caleb didn't laugh. He just stared at me. Man, if she's still thinking about where he took her, she's still thinking about him. I told him he was overreacting, but that seed of doubt had been planted. After that conversation, I started seeing it everywhere. It wasn't just restaurants anymore. It was everything. Michael bought her high-end jewelry. Michael had a better car. Michael knew how to dress for fancy events. Michael this. Michael that. Like the guy was some flawless, perfect human being. I asked her once, trying to keep it light, why they broke up if he was so amazing. She got this distant look in her eyes and said they wanted different things at the time. Not different things, period. And that distinction kept me awake more nights than I care to admit. But I loved her, and love makes you stupid sometimes. So, I decided to prove that I could be just as good, maybe even better. I started planning the proposal 6 months before I even bought the ring. I wanted everything to be perfect. Not Michael perfect, but Daniel perfect. Something that came from me, something real. I researched rings for weeks, diving into articles about cut, clarity, all this stuff I never thought I'd care about. I picked a white gold band with a round sapphire, not huge, but not tiny either. Something elegant that matched her style. The jeweler told me it was a beautiful choice, and I believed him because I'd poured my heart into every detail. 3 months of saving. Eating lunch from home, skipping weekend trips with Caleb, funneling every spare dollar into that ring fund. When I finally bought it, I felt this surge of pride, like I'd accomplished something real, something that would show Chloe exactly how much she meant to me. I hid the box in my sock drawer, classic move, I know, but I figured she'd never look there. I was planning to propose on her birthday, still 2 weeks away. Had the whole thing mapped out. Dinner at her favorite place, not the one Michael took her to. Then a walk through the park where we had our first date. Down on one knee under the gazebo where we shared our first kiss. It was going to be perfect. Then she found it. I came home from work on a Friday afternoon and walked into the bedroom to find Chloe sitting on the bed, the box open in her hands. My heart stopped. Not in a good way, but in that way where your brain screams that something is about to go very wrong. She looked up at me. I expected tears, excitement, joy, something positive. But her face was neutral, almost analytical. She held the ring up to the light, tilted it back and forth, examining it like a used car she wasn't sure about buying. "You are going to propose," she said. I nodded, trying to smile, trying to salvage the surprise. "I wanted it to be special," I said, walking over to sit beside her. She didn't smile back. She just kept looking at the ring. And then she said it. The sentence that ended everything, even though it took me a few more hours to truly realize it. "If my ex were here, he would have bought me a diamond ring." Not "thank you." Not "I love you." Not "yes, I'll marry you." Just a direct comparison to a man who hadn't been in her life for 5 years, but apparently still lived rent-free in her head. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The air just left my lungs, and I couldn't find words. She kept talking, saying something about how Michael had great taste, how he always knew what women wanted. I just sat there staring at the carpet, watching my future dissolve in real time. The ring was white gold with a sapphire. I had specifically chosen sapphire because it was her birthstone. I wanted it to be personal and meaningful. But apparently, personal and meaningful didn't matter if it wasn't what Michael would have done. I didn't yell, didn't argue, didn't defend my choice. I just reached over, closed the box, took it from her hands, and stood up. She looked confused, started to say something, but I was already walking out of the bedroom, grabbing my keys from the kitchen counter, heading for the door. "Where are you going?" she called after me. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob, turned back to look at her standing in the hallway, and said the only thing that made sense in that moment, to return it. The drive to the jewelry store felt like hours, though it was only 15 minutes. The whole time, I kept replaying that sentence in my head. If my ex were here. If my ex were here. If my ex were here. Like a broken record I couldn't turn off. I returned the ring the next morning. Walked into that same jewelry store where I'd spent hours picking out the perfect piece. The guy behind the counter immediately recognized me. He looked confused, asked if something was wrong with the ring. I just shook my head and said I didn't need it anymore. Store policy meant no full refunds on custom orders, only store credit or a partial cash return. I took the cash, even though it was 30% less than what I paid. Walking out of there with a check in my pocket instead of a ring box felt like signing divorce papers for a marriage that never happened. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, just staring at the steering wheel, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. That's when my phone started blowing up. Chloe had called 4 times, left 3 voicemails, sent a dozen texts, all variations of the same panic. "Where did you go? Why aren't you answering? We need to talk." I didn't respond. I drove to Caleb's place instead, walked in without knocking because that's what brothers do, and found him eating cereal in front of the TV. He took one look at my face and turned off the TV. "You returned it," he said. I nodded, sitting down on his couch like all the energy had just drained out of my body. Caleb didn't say, "I told you so," which I appreciated. He just listened while I told him everything. The way she examined the ring, the comparison to Michael, the cold, analytical look on her face like she was disappointed in a purchase she didn't even make. "So, what now?" Caleb asked. I realized I didn't have an answer. For 4 years, every plan I made included Chloe. Now I had to figure out what Daniel without Chloe even looked like. I stayed at Caleb's that whole day, ignored my phone, ordered pizza, and tried to pretend my life wasn't falling apart. But I knew I couldn't hide forever. So that evening, I drove back to our apartment. Walked in and found Chloe sitting on the couch waiting for me. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying, and part of me felt guilty until I remembered why I left in the first place. She stood up the moment she saw me, started talking fast, asking why I returned the ring, saying she didn't understand what happened, that she was just being honest about her feelings. "That's the problem," I said. It was the first time I'd raised my voice at her in 4 years. You were being honest, and your honesty told me that no matter what I do, it'll never be good enough because I'm not Michael. She tried to argue, said I was overreacting, that she loved me, that the ring was beautiful, but I stopped her. Chloe, you didn't say the ring was beautiful yesterday. You said Michael would have bought a diamond. I watched her face change as she realized I was right. We talked for 2 hours that night, and it wasn't a conversation. It was an excavation. Digging up every buried resentment I'd been ignoring for the past year. I told her about every time she mentioned Michael, every comparison, every nostalgic story that made me feel like I was competing in a race I didn't even know I'd entered. She cried, said she didn't realize she was doing it. Promised she'd stop. Even said she'd block Michael on everything if that's what I needed. But here's the thing about promises made in desperation, they don't mean anything because they're not coming from a place of understanding. They're coming from a place of fear. Fear of losing what you have, not love for what you have. And I'd spent enough time being someone's second choice. I can't do this anymore, I said finally. Her face went pale. What do you mean? She asked, but she knew. I could see it in her eyes. I mean, I can't spend the rest of my life wondering if I'm enough. If this gesture is good enough, if this gift measures up, if this moment would have been better if Michael was here instead of me. I started packing that night. Just grabbed a duffel bag and threw in enough clothes for a week. Told her I'd come back for the rest of my stuff later. She followed me around the apartment crying, begging me to stay, saying we could work it out, that she'd change, that she'd never mention Michael again. It's not about Michael, I said, stopping in the hallway to look at her. It's about the fact that when you saw that ring, when you saw me trying to give you forever, your first thought was about someone else. I could see the realization hit her, the understanding that this wasn't about one comment. It was about a pattern, a fundamental truth she'd been ignoring and I'd been tolerating. I left her the apartment, told her I'd keep paying my half of the rent until the lease was up in 3 months, that I'd make sure she was okay financially, because that's the kind of person I am. But I couldn't stay there anymore. Every corner of that place held a memory, and every memory now felt contaminated by the knowledge that while I was building a future, she was still living in the past. I drove back to Caleb's place that night with my duffel bag and a hollow feeling in my chest. My brother opened the door, saw my face, and just stepped aside to let me in. Guest room's yours as long as you need it, he said. I nodded, too tired to even say thank you. I lay in Caleb's guest bed that night, staring at the ceiling, and all I could think about was that moment when Chloe held up the ring. The moment when I saw disappointment instead of joy. And I knew I'd made the right choice. Love shouldn't feel like an audition. Like you're constantly performing for approval. And I'd been performing for a year without even realizing it. My phone buzzed around midnight. Another text from Chloe. This one longer than the others. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it. Please come home. I love you. We can fix this. But some things aren't fixable. Some things are just fundamentally broken. And no amount of apologies can change the fact that when given the choice between appreciating what she had and longing for what she lost, she chose longing every single time. I turned off my phone completely, rolled over, and for the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking up anxious. I turned my phone back on 3 days later, and the first message I saw was from Chloe. It read, I threw away 4 years over one comment. I remember staring at that text, thinking how someone could live through the same relationship and come away with a completely different understanding of what went wrong. It wasn't one comment. It was 1,000 small cuts over the course of a year. But she couldn't see that because she was too busy romanticizing a past that probably wasn't even as perfect as she remembered. I blocked her number that day, not out of anger, but out of necessity. Because every text was an attempt to rewrite history, to minimize what happened, to make me feel like I was the unreasonable one for having standards. The calls didn't stop, though. They just came from different numbers. Her sister, her mom, even a couple of her friends, all with variations of the same message about how I was breaking her heart and how relationships require forgiveness and compromise. I didn't respond to any of them except one. Harper, Chloe's best friend since college, called me a week after the breakup. "I need to know what actually happened," Harper said, and I could tell from her voice that she'd only heard Chloe's version. So, I told her everything. The Michael comments, the ring reaction, the constant comparisons, all of it. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Harper said something I didn't expect. "I told her this would happen," she said quietly. "I told her 2 years ago that she needed to let Michael go, that she was going to lose you if she kept living in the past, but she didn't listen." That conversation confirmed what I already knew, that this wasn't in my head, that other people saw it, too, and that Chloe had been warned by someone who loved her and still chose to ignore it. Harper apologized for not speaking up sooner, said she thought it would get better. We hung up with an understanding that some friendships don't survive breakups, even when both people are good people. The harassment ramped up after that. Messages from numbers I didn't recognize. People I'd never met telling me I was cruel. That I gave up too easily, that Chloe was devastated and it was my fault. I responded once, just once, to a message that came from one of her coworkers' phones. "Tell Chloe to call Michael," I wrote back. Then I changed my number entirely, because I was done being the villain in a story where I was actually the one who got hurt. 2 weeks after I changed my number, Caleb showed me something on his phone, a screenshot someone had sent him of Chloe's Instagram story. She posted a long caption about knowing your worth and not settling for people who don't appreciate you, with a photo of herself looking sad but beautiful in that performative way people do when they want sympathy online. The irony wasn't lost on me. The person who didn't appreciate what she had was giving advice about worth. But I didn't say anything. Just handed Caleb his phone back and went back to eating my dinner. What Chloe didn't post about was what Caleb heard through mutual friends, that she'd actually reached out to Michael, sent him a long message about how she'd been thinking about him, how she wondered if they made a mistake ending things. Basically everything she should have been feeling guilty about. Michael, according to the story that made its way back to us, was engaged to someone else now, had been for 6 months. He responded to Chloe with a polite but firm message saying he was happy in his life and wished her well. She apparently had a complete breakdown after that. Called in sick to work for 3 days, stopped posting on social media. The whole dramatic collapse you'd expect from someone who just realized the fantasy they'd been chasing for 5 years didn't actually exist anymore. I didn't feel good hearing about it. I'm not that petty. But I didn't feel bad either. I felt vindicated, like the universe had finally confirmed what I'd been saying all along. I stayed with Caleb for a month before I found my own place, a smaller apartment across town. 1 bedroom, decent light, and no memories attached to it. Moving into that space felt like starting over, like I was 22 again instead of 26, but in a good way this time. Like I had a chance to build something that was actually mine. I bought a used sedan with some of the money I'd saved for the ring. Nothing fancy, but reliable. And every time I drove it, I thought about how this was what financial responsibility actually looked like, investing in things that move you forward instead of things that keep you stuck. Work became easier once I wasn't constantly distracted by relationship anxiety. My boss even noticed, said I seemed more focused, and I got assigned to a major project that could lead to a promotion. Life was quieter without Chloe, but quiet turned out to be exactly what I needed. Space to think, space to figure out who Daniel was when he wasn't trying to measure up to a ghost. 3 months after the breakup, I met someone at a coffee shop near my apartment. Her name was Nora, and we ended up talking for 3 hours about everything except our past relationships. She was a graphic designer, funny, easy to talk to, and when she smiled, it felt genuine instead of calculated. I didn't ask for her number that day because I wasn't ready. But we kept running into each other at that same coffee shop. And eventually, running into each other turned into planning to run into each other. Nora never once mentioned an ex, never compared me to anyone, never made me feel like I was competing for affection. and that absence of drama felt like the most romantic thing in the world. 6 months after the breakup, I saw Chloe one last time, completely by accident, at a grocery store downtown. She was in the produce section, looked thinner, tired. When our eyes met, I could see her trying to decide whether to approach me. I gave her a small nod, the kind you give acquaintances, and kept walking. She didn't follow. Later that night, I checked her Instagram one last time. I don't know why, maybe curiosity. Her latest post was another one of those inspirational quote graphics about self-love and growth. I closed the app, deleted it from my phone, and never looked back, because I finally understood that some people spend so much time looking backward, they forget how to move forward, and I wasn't going to be one of them. What would you have done in my situation?